You felt it in you, that shift, that quiet transformation that didn't come crashing through the door, but crept in like fog, soft, subtle, almost invisible, until everything suddenly felt colder, emptier, heavier. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't confess they were leaving, but they left, piece by piece, emotionally, energetically. Their body might have stayed in the room, but their soul, their presence, was nowhere to be found. And that's what broke you. Not a loud ending, not a betrayal, not a door slammed in your face, but the ache of being unseen while still standing right in front of them, the sting of their silence, the ache of unanswered questions, the slow withdrawal that felt like being erased in real time. You started second-guessing everything, their words, their gestures, even the moments you once believed were sacred. You retraced conversations. You played memories like broken records. Looking for the moment it all began to unravel, you wonder what you missed, what you did wrong. But here's the truth no one tells you. Pulling away isn't always about you. And it sure as hell isn't always a sign that love is gone. Sometimes it's love itself that makes them retreat. Sometimes someone loves you so much that it scares the very foundation they stand on. Because for some, love doesn't feel safe. It feels dangerous, exposing, threatening to the walls they've spent years building just to survive. So they do what they've always done. They retreat. They disconnect. They vanish into themselves. Not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much. And when love starts to feel overwhelming, when it digs too deep, gets too close, they believe their only option is to run. Not to escape you, but to escape the version of themselves they're terrified of becoming when they finally open up. So don't mistake the silence for absence. Don't assume the distance means they never cared. Because love doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers from behind a locked door. Sometimes it trembles instead of reaching. Sometimes it hides, not because it's weak, but because it's still healing. Yes, they pulled away. And yes, it hurt like hell. But in the smallest, quietest ways, love still showed. Maybe in a late night check-in. Maybe in something small they remembered. Maybe in the way they looked at you like you were the only real thing in a world they couldn't trust. They never said it outright. They never gave you the clarity you begged for. But love was there, hidden in the cracks, lingering in the spaces between what they said and what they couldn't. And that's what made it so confusing. Because how can someone who claims to love you leave you standing in the dark? How can someone who feels so much give you so little? Here's the answer: because some people are at war with themselves. And in that war, love is a battlefield they don't know how to survive. So when love shows up, real, honest, raw, they panic. They don't know how to stay. They don't know how to be fully seen. So they disappear, not to hurt you, but to protect themselves. They pull away, not because they don't care, but because they care so deeply it terrifies them. It's not fair, and it's not your job to fix them. But you need to know this. The way they loved you, even in retreat, was real. It just wasn't mature. It wasn't whole, wasn't ready. So now you're standing in the space between what was and what could have been, and you have a choice. You can chase them, or you can chase your own healing. You can beg for a love that hides, or you can rise for a love that stands tall beside you. Because if someone pulls away, but love still flickers, it means the story isn't black and white, but it also doesn't mean you're meant to suffer in the gray. So hold on to this truth, love, even when buried beneath fear, still leaves a trace. But you weren't born to live on traces. You were born to feel it fully, to receive it freely, to be chosen without hesitation. Let this be your moment of awakening, not to romanticize the pain, but to recognize the pattern and to finally decide that your heart deserves more than fragments, silence, and guesswork. Because love that hides may still be love, but it's not the kind that sets you free. And freedom is the only kind worth fighting for. You can't heal what you don't understand. And sometimes the most painful part of being close to someone who pulls away isn't the silence. It's the mystery behind it. Why did they change? Why did the warmth disappear? Why, after all you gave, did they slip through your fingers like water? The answer often isn't about you at all. The truth lives deeper, in places they don't even fully understand themselves. Because for some people, closeness doesn't feel like comfort. It feels like danger. Not because of anything you did, but because of everything they've been through. People who pull away often have a storm raging inside them. A storm born from years of learning that vulnerability is a threat. That love is a weapon. That needing someone is the fastest way to lose everything. They've been taught by life, by pain, by patterns that being seen means being hurt. So when they begin to care, when love starts to crack through their armor, they panic, they retreat, they disconnect, not out of cruelty, but out of survival. Because for them, loving you isn't just emotional, it's dangerous. Not because you are a threat, but because love exposes the places they've spent years trying to hide. It reveals the wounds they buried. It calls out the parts of themselves they've long silenced. And when that happens, their instinct isn't to lean in, it's to run. You see, we often expect love to look a certain way, to be soft, to be steady, to be obvious. But for someone who's never known safe love, their version of loving you might look like fear. It might look like silence. It might look like pulling away just when things start to feel real. And it's confusing, isn't it? Because the same person who held you like a lifeline is now nowhere to be found. The same person who looked into your eyes with truth is now dodging your presence entirely. It makes you question your worth. It makes you wonder if any of it was real. But that's the cruel twist. It was real. That's why they ran. They felt it deeply, maybe deeper than even you did. And that depth terrified them because they didn't know how to hold something so pure without breaking it or themselves. So instead of opening up, they closed down. Instead of reaching out, they recoiled. Instead of standing in the light of your love, they crawled back into their darkness. And you were left holding the weight of two people, trying to make sense of their retreat while carrying your own heartbreak. But hear this. You are not responsible for their emotional avoidance. You are not a healer for someone who refuses to confront their own past. Yes, love requires patience, but it does not require you to bleed for someone unwilling to bandage their own wounds. Understanding their struggle may give you compassion, and that's powerful. But compassion must never cost you clarity, because while their fears may be valid, they don't give them the right to abandon you emotionally, to come close only to vanish, to love you only when it's convenient, to disappear the moment things get real. Their internal war is not your battlefield. You cannot win a fight they won't even admit exists. You cannot pull someone out of hiding if they're determined to live in the shadows. And you cannot carry a relationship on the back of your hope alone. This is the unseen struggle, not theirs but yours. The struggle of loving someone who doesn't know how to stay, of watching someone you care for sabotage the very thing they claimed they wanted, of breaking yourself just to keep them whole. But today is the day you stop doing that. You don't need to fix them. You don't need to chase them. And you definitely don't need to sacrifice your peace just to prove your loyalty. Love shouldn't feel like punishment. It shouldn't feel like confusion. And it shouldn't feel like you're constantly one misstep away from being left behind. Some people have love in their hearts but fear in their bones. And until they learn how to replace that fear with courage, they'll keep pulling away. They'll keep repeating the cycle. They'll keep choosing safety over intimacy, even if it costs them everything. Don't let it cost you. You might not hear the words. You might not see the grand gestures. There may be no public confessions, no constant reassurance, no textbook expressions of devotion, but still something lingers. It's subtle, quiet, almost unnoticeable unless you're listening with your soul instead of your ears. Because for some people, love doesn't show up wearing certainty. It doesn't arrive with clarity or rhythm or consistency. It arrives through contradiction, through tension, through pauses that ache with things left unsaid. And if you've ever been close to someone who pulls away yet somehow still loves, you know exactly what this feels like. It's in the hesitation before they respond, like they're trying to speak a language they've never been taught. It's in the way they remember the smallest things. Your favorite tea, a story you told once and never brought up again. It's in how they circle back after distance, not to explain, not to apologize, but simply to reappear. They don't always come with solutions. They don't always admit what's real, but they come back, even if just for a moment, even if it's awkward, inconsistent, or out of nowhere. And that's the thing. When love is hidden beneath fear, it doesn't move like love is supposed to. It resists, it withdraws, but it never completely disappears. It leaves fingerprints on the edges of everything. You feel it when they check in, not because they're supposed to, but because they need to know you're okay. You feel it in the clumsy way they try to be near without drawing attention to it. You feel it in the subtle glances, the awkward silences filled with weight, the moments when they're more present than they know how to admit. And it hurts, doesn't it? Because these signs, they're not enough. Not for the kind of love that stands tall. Not for the kind of partnership you crave. Grounded, safe, whole, but still they're proof. Proof that you mattered. Proof that even if they couldn't love you out loud, they were loving you in the only way they knew how, quietly, anxiously, imperfectly. But here's what you must understand. Recognizing their love doesn't mean settling for scraps. Understanding their fear doesn't mean accepting emotional absence. It simply means this: you're not crazy. You didn't imagine it. You weren't the only one feeling something real. And maybe that's all the closure you'll ever get. Not a full explanation, not an apology. Just the knowledge that love was present, even when they weren't. Just the realization that someone can love you deeply and still be completely unprepared to handle the weight of that love. Because love, in its purest form, isn't about emotion. It's about responsibility. And someone who hasn't learned how to take care of their own heart will never know how to take care of yours. Yes, the signs are there in broken patterns and quiet reappearances and clumsy attempts to stay connected from a distance. But they aren't signs of readiness. They're signs of a soul that's still struggling, a heart that's still hiding, a person that wants love but hasn't learned how to give it without disappearing. So what do you do with that? How do you hold truth in one hand and pain in the other? You accept what is, you honor what was, but you refuse to sacrifice your future for someone else's fear. Because the love you deserve doesn't hide in silence. It doesn't flinch when things get real. It doesn't pull away and expect you to interpret the silence like a riddle. Real love stands close. Even when it's hard, it speaks. Even when it's scared. It chooses you, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's not. So yes, their love may still show, even through the distance, even in the silence, even in the smallest, most fragile ways. But that doesn't mean you have to wait. It doesn't mean you have to stay, and it doesn't mean you should silence your needs just because they're still learning how to meet their own. Feel the love. Acknowledge it. Let it remind you that what you experienced was real. But don't let it chain you to a version of love that asks you to constantly decode it. Because you were made for love that doesn't have to be guessed. Love that is spoken, shown, and stood on. Not love that disappears and resurfaces like a tide you can't control. There's a moment you stop recognizing your own reflection. It doesn't come all at once. It's slow, subtle. It sneaks up on you in the quiet compromises, the silence you learn to tolerate, the parts of yourself you begin to mute just to keep the peace. It starts with a little self-doubt. You wonder if maybe you're asking for too much. You tell yourself they're trying. They just need time. You excuse their withdrawal as emotional overwhelm. You shrink your needs into whisperers, hoping that if you stay small enough, still enough, quiet enough, they'll come back. And every time they disappear and you wait, every time they return and you forgive, you lose a piece of yourself. You stop speaking your truth because you're afraid it'll push them further away. You stop expressing your pain because you don't want to be too much. You stop asking for what you need, not because you don't need it, but because you're exhausted from asking and not receiving. And in the process, you forget how to be fully you. You forget what it feels like to be chosen clearly without hesitation. You forget that love is supposed to feel like home, not like walking on a tightrope. What began as connection becomes a constant negotiation, not between you and them, but between you and yourself. How much can I bend before I break? How long can I wait before I'm completely empty? How many times can I forgive the same distance before I forget what it's like to feel safe? You didn't mean to abandon yourself. You were just trying to hold on, to love without pressure, to believe in potential, to give grace to someone who never learned how to receive it. But here's the truth you've been avoiding. You're not just holding on to them. You're holding on to a version of yourself that doesn't exist anymore. The version of you that could keep giving without running dry. The version that thought love meant sacrifice, even if it cost your peace, your voice, your boundaries. The version that thought if I'm just patient enough, maybe they'll come around. But what you haven't realized yet, or maybe you have deep down, is that in trying to prove you're worthy of their love, you stopped believing you were already enough. You thought their approval would validate you. You thought their return would restore you. But the longer you wait for them to show up for you, the more you disappear from yourself. And that's the tragedy, not that they pulled away, but that you did too. You stopped being loud about your worth. You stopped standing in the power of your voice. You stopped believing that love should feel mutual, reciprocal, steady. Instead, you began measuring love by how much you could endure, by how much silence you could translate, by how much emotional starvation you could survive. That's not love. That's self-abandonment dressed up as loyalty. And let's be honest, it's not that you don't know how to love deeply. It's that you've been giving that depth to someone who doesn't know how to receive it without retreating. Someone whose idea of love is rooted in fear. Someone who confuses emotional intimacy with threat. Someone who wants to be loved but doesn't yet know how to stand still in it without fleeing. That's not your burden to carry. You are not responsible for teaching someone how to love you while being ignored, neglected, or half held in return. Your tenderness should not be a training ground for someone else's healing. You've lost too much of yourself in trying to be understanding. You've excused too many red flags as trauma. You've stayed too long out of hope that they'll come back different. But here's your truth. You don't need to lose yourself to be loved. You don't need to silence yourself to be chosen. You don't need to bleed emotionally to prove your worth. You are not difficult. You are not too much. You are not broken. You are simply someone who loves fully, openly, deeply. And you've been giving that love to someone who doesn't yet know how to stand in the light of it. But now it's time to return to yourself, to reclaim the parts of you you've been dimming, to stop apologizing for your depth, to stop chasing someone who only ever meets you halfway. Because love that costs you your identity is too expensive. And staying in spaces where you have to prove you're worthy over and over is spiritual poverty. You haven't lost yourself. You've just buried yourself beneath layers of survival. And now it's time to come home. There is a quiet breaking point. And it doesn't always look like rage. It doesn't always come with screaming or tears or final words shouted in the heat of conflict. Sometimes it comes in stillness. A breath you didn't know you were holding. A whisper in your chest that simply says enough. It's the moment you realize that waiting is costing you too much. That loving them in their hiding place has slowly turned into abandoning yourself. That no matter how deeply you feel, how patient you've been, how much grace you've offered, it will never be enough for someone who hasn't chosen themselves first. And you can't carry someone into love who's still holding hands with their fear. So you stop. Not because you don't love them. Not because it didn't matter. But because you finally matter too. This is the moment you choose yourself. Not with resentment, not with revenge, but with reverence. You stop chasing someone else's potential and start reclaiming your reality. You stop making excuses for silence, for distance, for inconsistency. You stop shrinking to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. You remember who you were before the waiting wore you down. Before the silence taught you to second guess yourself. Before the love you offered so freely began to feel like a burden to the one you gave it to. And suddenly, your clarity becomes louder than your ache. You realize that choosing yourself doesn't mean you didn't love them. It means you love yourself enough to stop bleeding for someone who refuses to heal. You begin to understand something vital. That someone can love you and still not be good for you. That someone can mean well and still harm you with their fear. That someone can want you deeply and still never show up when it counts. And that's when you finally let go. Not because you're bitter, not because you've given up, but because you're done living in the pause between who they are and who you hope they'll become. You stop waiting for emotional scraps and start demanding emotional presence. You stop hoping they'll suddenly wake up to your worth and start recognizing that it was never your job to remind them. This isn't a loud revolution. This is a sacred return. A coming home to the version of you that knows what real love looks like. That knows love doesn't vanish when things get hard. That knows you don't have to be hard to be loved. You begin to choose peace over potential, truth over hope, healing over chaos. And even though it hurts, even though you miss the moments that were real, you know this is the beginning of something deeper, not with them, with you. You start taking your time back. You start speaking your truth louder. You stop tolerating the bare minimum and calling it effort. You draw boundaries not to punish, but to protect your heart. Because you finally see it as sacred. You stop explaining your emotions to people who respond with withdrawal. You stop waiting for someone to come around when you were standing right there the entire time. You stop equating loyalty with silence. And most importantly, you stop begging for love to feel like love. You begin to choose partners who don't flinch at your depth. You begin to seek connection with people who stay when it's hard, who listen when it's uncomfortable, who lean in instead of checking out. You begin to rebuild your self-worth, not on someone else's inconsistency, but on your own truth, your own presence, your own unwavering heart. Because love is not supposed to be a maze. It is not supposed to be a riddle. It is not supposed to feel like you're chasing a shadow that keeps disappearing the closer you get. You've done the work. You've waited long enough. You've loved with open hands and an open heart. But now it's your turn. Your turn to receive, your turn to be met, not just mirrored, your turn to be chosen, not just when it's convenient, but constantly, fully, and with certainty. Choosing yourself is not the end of love. It's the beginning of true love. The kind that starts within. The kind that says, I am no longer willing to betray myself to be loved by someone else. And from this moment forward, everything changes. This is the threshold. The line between the person you were and the person you are about to become. Not because someone else changed. Not because they finally came back. But because you did. You reached your limit. You touched the edge of what your heart could endure. And instead of falling over, you chose to rise. No more chasing silence. No more translating emotional distance into hidden affection. No more worshipping potential at the cost of your peace. Because there comes a moment, and this is it, where you don't just survive the pain, you use it. You don't just move on. You move through with fire in your lungs and clarity in your chest. This isn't about them anymore. This is about you, your worth, your voice, your boundaries, your wild, unstoppable capacity to choose yourself even when it breaks your heart. It's time to stop loving people into their healing while abandoning your own. It's time to stop calling instability intensity and confusion chemistry. It's time to stop mistaking emotional hunger for depth, because real love does not hide. It does not punish. It does not run when you speak your truth. It stands still when everything shakes. It listens. It leans in. It grows when it's uncomfortable, not disappears when it's inconvenient. So what do now? You walk forward. Even if your knees tremble. Even if your chest is still heavy with the echo of what was never said, even if you still miss them, even if part of you still hopes they'll return changed, you walk anyway. You choose the fire, not the fog of uncertainty, not the gray area of almost, not the limbo of maybe one day. You choose the fire, the uncomfortable, unrelenting burn of truth, because truth clears the path. Truth sets you free. Truth ends cycles. This is where you rise, not for revenge, not to prove anything, but because you finally decided that your life, your full, powerful, radiant life, begins now. So close the chapter that made you question your worth. Release the grip on the story that was never yours to finish. And burn the rule book that taught you love was something you had to earn by staying small. You are not too much. You were never too much. You were simply more than they were ready to hold, and that is not a flaw. That is your brilliance. Let the silence teach you. Let the pain awaken you. Let the distance transform you. And when you finally choose yourself, fully, without apology, you'll realize the one thing they could never fake was your power. Because it was never about them. It was always about you. You're not waiting anymore. You're not hoping anymore. You're not begging to be seen. You see yourself now. You choose yourself now. And that changes everything. So step through the fire. Let it burn away everything that no longer belongs to your future. And don't look back. Because the life that's waiting on the other side of this pain, the peace, the clarity, the real love, it begins the moment you stop shrinking. Now rise.